So the first thing you'd want to do here is probably remove the suckers, and as I was mentioning earlier, you can use these suckers if they're the right size for propagating, if you're interested in that one. This one right here, this could propagate. Okay, it is a little thin, but it's not too thin. So you could probably even go up to here. And like I said, I like to cut it at an angle. And when you have the top, so you know the orientation, and that when it rains or when you water, you don't get the water pooling there, because there are a lot of ubiquitous pathogens that can float and land on that water droplet and grow down. So you want to prune and have it at an angle at the top, and you have to choose how many nodes you want to put into the ground or have above ground when you're planting that thing. I've often been told that you just need one below and one above, and that's possible. I usually try to go with 3, and depending on where you're pulling, you'll have different internode length. So you can see at the bottom of the cutting there's a shorter internode length there, so you might be able to have more of these meristems underneath the potting media, which will have more areas where the roots can come out. Okay, the roots will also form from where you cut it. So if you were to dip this in the rooting hormone, first of all, this propagule is probably a little too large. So what I'll do is I cut it flat at the bottom, and I cut it, I don't know, maybe 1/4 or 1/2 an inch from the node. You don't want it too long, okay? And then here, you don't want it too long, because this will die back, and then that can be when you plant this in the ground and these flower out, this part here doesn't have any meristems. And so I've seen many situations where this part of the propagule will die back to here, and you'll have this piece of dead wood, and then you'll have these shoots, and that piece of dead wood could harbor pathogens as well. So you'd probably just try not to cut the meristem there, but then you just cut it diagonally like that and cut it at the base.
Cut just on the other side of the node for both the propagation side and the upside.
Yeah, that's right, for both sides there. And then, you know, if this was the material, you would just dip it in the rooting hormone and put it like that, and make sure this propagule stays moist, and the soil that is housing those 2 meristems or 2 nodes at the bottom stays moist down there, and then it will grow. There are people who actually have historic, you know, they put in irrigation and they planted directly into the ground. I know a grower in California who propagates that way, but you're probably going to replace a lot unless you get it down to a science. But anyhow, and so you want to cut them down to the base and try not to leave too much out, because if you have any meristems that are peeking out from where you cut it, you're going to have what that individual said earlier, that witch broom effect or whatever, right? And then if you keep doing that, I have trees in Ventura County that it's just a mat of clipped suckers, you know, and that is really annoying, which leads us to recommend starting early like we are kind of. So another thing about pruning is you want to have the blade end up against the branch where you're cutting, where you're heading it off. Okay, so for example, like if I'm cutting this one, I want the blade to be up against the trunk. I don't want to put it this way, because I'll have this little piece there, that little size left on the shoot there, and then that can sprout out. So you want the blade to be flush up against the branch. I'm going to cut that one. And sometimes you need a little hand saw, okay? So for example, the crotch angle on this sucker is really, really tight, and sometimes it's impossible to get your implement down in there and cut it flush, or there might be a little too much surface area. But in this case, I cut it flush, and this would be a perfect, you could probably make maybe 10 trees or more out of this, just this one sucker there. And then you want to clip these and cut them flush. Anything that's growing into the other trunks, you want to try to remove that. And trying to form this tree is, if you have a branch this low and it does produce a fruit, and it's a heavy fruit, it's going to be dragging on the ground, right? And then it might not be able to be saleable or edible for that matter. And then the critters will really know where the pomegranates are located. And you always want to watch your fingers. Now in this case, this one right here, getting up to here, you can see it kind of bifurcates here and into these two coming up. And as we talked about in the lecture today, we want to try to keep it open vase, like they talk about in Israel and California, because you want to try to get some air and light in there. And so with these two bifurcating, I would tend to choose this thicker branch that's coming out sideways like this and remove this branch to kind of open it up a little bit, like that. And these little spurs or these little tiny, you also want to remove those because those can flush out and then cause more of a chaos in the...
How high do you go?
It just varies.
Those pomegranates are, if this branch was to produce and it had like 3 or 4 pomegranates, it's going to be bending like this, right? So you don't want it to be too close to the ground. You want to kind of imagine if there are pomegranates on that branch, is it going to be touching the ground? And that's probably a pretty good measure there. And so all of these are crisscrossing here, so I'm going to be going around the tree and trying to remove any crisscrossing branches that are growing into the middle of the tree. See how this one's growing into the center of the tree here? Got to remove that one, because if this flushes out, it's going to create more of a chaotic situation. So I'm going in, I'm cutting around here. And again, you want to prune when it's dry. So we're just doing this for demonstration purposes, and this one's growing into the rest of the tree right there. And I'm just going around and starting at the bottom. And sometimes it's so bad that you just have this bush coming out like that, and that's when you really have to get out your loppers or your hand pruners and just try to make a hole for you to get under, and then skirt it. Skirt it's when you bring up the canopy from the ground, okay? It's nice soft ground here. In some places, like if I was in Florida, I would have already been eaten alive by fire ants. You know, this is. So this one's growing in the center there. So you see this one's kind of growing into the center, right? And it's crisscrossing with all of these other branches. So, and there's a lot of executive decisions in pomegranate pruning where you have to really think about it. Do we have the loppers here? The blade is up against the branch in which you're cutting, right? Because otherwise you're going to have the length of this part of the loppers, and you're going to have a stub that long. So you want to make it flush with the blade. And so I'm doing that right here, where the blade, I want to cut this one so the blade's going to be flush up against the branch there. So I'm going in like this. That's okay cut. But the lower, oh, thank you. But you also want to make sure that you try to reduce the surface area, right? Because you can make a cut that can be a really long oval, a huge entry point for pests and diseases. So, okay, this is the one I was talking about here. This one right here, kind of coming off of this branch here, growing into the center of the tree. I'm going to make the executive decision to cut this one. And it's shaping the tree a little bit. It's a big cut, right? And I think, now with these ones here, I can see which branch is older and which branch is younger. And it looks like that this is an old sucker that grew up straight up into the canopy here. So I'm also going to remove this puppy here. There might be a lot of fruiting wood up here though, okay? So sometimes when you're making these decisions in pruning this late in the game, you're going to lose some level of production, right? So I'm going to remove that one.
Which one is it again?
So this is the older one. You can kind of see how it's...
The thinner one.
Yeah, the thinner one. You can see this one's thicker, this one's thinner, so this one's probably older than this one. You can kind of see a little bit of a greenish tinge to it, which means it doesn't have as much secondary growth, which is kind of the wood forming, certain plants, like trees, they form wood. And so you can kind of see that this one is less advanced in its formation of secondary growth. So I'm going to go in there, and it's going to be a tough one because this might even be a saw a saw type cut.
So when you make a big cut, leaves a big surface like that.
Like this, right?
Yeah. You ever use a pruning seal or anything?
So,
or is it best to just leave them?
that's a really good question. There are people who swear by that prune sealing material, and then there are physiologists who say that you'll seal in pathogens, that you'll reduce the wound healing. I was talking earlier before the talk started about the oxytetracycline that they're injecting in the citrus, and they go and they drill a hole in that trunk. And a lot of folks are like, don't you want us to gunk that up so nothing can go in there? And they say, no, it'll heal naturally. But I think there's a trade-off there, and I think that needs to be studied. In this, with the rain, I might want to consider doing that, because as this rain's coming, if you have a hard rain and it's splashing up all these soil-borne ubiquitous pathogens into those wounds, that's a recipe for disaster, right? But typically, I do not see, in the industry, I do not see anybody using wound sealing material. But it's a very good question. You're welcome. So, what else is growing into the center? Well, this one's growing into the center, right? It's kind of crossing here, crossing there. So I'm going to remove this one. And this one is kind of crossing here. You could remove this one. It's going to eventually start rubbing up against there. You have crisscrossing here. Again, I'm going to make one of these executive decisions of cutting that off, but it can be, it could be quite painful to, you put in inputs, you put in water and fertilizer, you see this tree growing for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years, and now you're just removing this biomass. It can be devastating.
So why wouldn't you just remove this and leave this?
You absolutely, that's a decision that you can make. That's a decision that you can make, and
it is coming out.
It is coming out. It's a little bit close there, but let's listen to the experienced farmer and just cut right.
Experience. The more you hack on that, the better I'm feeling.
You want to make sure that you cut up here.
Taking the whole thing.
So yeah, who would have cut this whole thing off? Raise your hand. Okay, who would leave it like it is? Okay, and then we have a bunch of folks who don't vote, just like the election systems. And
I've got another thought.
Is there a write-in on
I would have taken this right here off.
This one right here is a leader, right? This one right here. So what I'm going to do, and Ben, please invite me back.
That's what I would have taken off, so you're doing great.
Okay, thanks, Ben. I'm going to cut that one. And sometimes, like if you do have a hand a hand saw, you can cut a little bit more flush there, right? Sometimes with these loppers, it's kind of difficult to get a good cut, and you actually need to have a saw there. Okay, and then I see we have all these little fellas over here that we're just going to kind of shape it into a tree here. You don't want to go too high up. Some people they kind of get carried away, right? And they keep going higher, and then they look and they're like, oh no, I've taken out all of the fruiting wood. And another thing you have to consider about top heavy, right? You're not on too much of a slope here, but especially if you're on a slope and you get top heavy with pomegranates, and the root system isn't deep, they'll just fall right over. Okay.
So you make every cut of the 45.
Well, if it's coming out, if it's coming out straight up, so I do it flush if possible. But if it's up here, it's good to have it angled so that you don't get water pooling there. Especially in one of these topping cuts, I would do that. Now, what else is going towards the middle? Oh, here's one growing right into the middle here. So I'm removing that one, removing that one.
So John?
Yes.
Question. That leader you cut, that means the enzymes are going to have to push down. It's going to start to more push out more. If this was a younger tree, you wouldn't do that until you got up to more.
Got up to a certain height, right? Yeah, because that's right. Because there's a hormone called auxin. Okay, and this auxin that was on this leader is sending the auxin down and inhibiting inhibiting the lateral growth, right? So by taking out this dominant leader, it's going to influence this tree to bush out a little bit more, okay? And even sucker, and this is when you go in as soon as it's suckering.
Oh, you made more work for me.
He made more work for you, yeah. You're going to have work no matter what, Ben, but yes, I did unfortunately, I made a little bit more work for you. And depending on the size you want, you can prune in different ways. I kind of brought this one down a little bit by taking out that dominant leader, but you also want it to be balanced as well, right? So let's see here. We did an oak.
Take out that one, those two.
Yeah, they're kind of close to the ground there. They might flush out and bend, so that's probably a pretty good cut. Pretty good cut there. Absolutely.
What do you do with something like right here? Is that one that just leave that's in that crotch or?
This thing, I would cut this right here. This one's growing back into the plant, so I'd cut that one off. This one is kind of crisscrossing. And it's coming up from around here, but I would just cut it there. And so another thing is anything that is growing downward, you also want to cut. So for example, anything that's down on this bottom end, this one's starting to point down. You could cut it right there. You can cut it right there. I'm going to cut it right there. Yeah, and that as a grower, as a horticulturist, you can determine for yourself if you want to do that next time. And different cultivars are going to react different ways. This is the first time I've cut on this cultivar, but you might have some crossing right here. Okay, so would you take out the smaller one or the longer one that's going out? This one's also crossing here. So it looks like somebody has good experience pruning, making good decisions. Yeah, and this is starting to look a little better. This one's kind of going inside there. This one's kind of going inside.
These two guys need to come.
Those are in the inside, right? Yeah, absolutely. Let's kind of open it up to get some nice airflow there. We got a lot of crisscrossing here.
Yeah.
This one's kind of growing in. And it starts raining on us, and it gets really exciting, right? This one's going straight up. That's crisscrossing, right?
Guy,
yeah.
You rub it on that other one.
That's right. Okay.
Tip them down to promote flowering or
like talking about kind of reducing the, like if you have like a full, like.
I might be needed, but I've been, my pomegranates, I can cut every single tip.
Right, and there are some folks who say that can induce a growth when they're topping the tree with the hedger. They're really hitting a lot of those, especially up at the top, and that can induce. So you're talking about something like this.
Promise you, that thing will bend
Some of
down.
this will still be here.
Now this. So, this is, we're pretty close, and you can continue to hack on it, but I did remove a significant amount of biomass.
There's more than half of it gone.
Right, and and then every cut it gets more and more depressing and scary because, every cut you're potentially removing fruiting wood. But this is a little more shaped than before. And I'd like to revisit this next year to see how this fruits out. But as you can see, we now have maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 4 or 5 trunks on this particular tree. You could just as easily remove all but one and try to train that one. But pruning is something that you want to start early in the tree's life so that you don't have to make some of these serious pruning decisions when the tree has grown in a way that may or may not be conducive to production. But this one's growing in pretty well. But that's kind of what I would do. You want to kind of make sure that it's balanced. Okay, it seems kind of heavy on this side, maybe a little bit, but I'm just going to I'm gonna stop while I'm ahead. Multiple trunk trees with these tight crotch angles is the whole thing could rip, right? When you have these real tight crotch angles here, boom, boom, and then you have a ton of fruit up here, it can actually bend down and then rip at the base, okay? And so you want to try to avoid getting too much moisture at the trunk. Okay, so when Ben gets this drip going, I see maybe a drip line there, you want to make sure that that drip, that emitter isn't hitting up against that trunk. Extremely important, because once you start getting too much moisture in that trunk, it's really going to mess with the structural integrity of that wood, and then when it does produce a lot of fruit, it'll drop.
So we've got ours, we got like a bowl around it with dirt mounded around.
Okay.
So when it waters, it collects
Yeah, so
and gradually goes down.
Kind of
So
drops
is that okay?
How old's your tree?
How old is it? 4 years old? 5?
And you have it mounded up against the trunk?
Not against. No, it's a bowl around.
You have a nice stable irrigation system. I would absolutely recommend drip on both sides. You know, some physiologists believe you want the same amount of moisture and nutrients on both sides of that tree in that row, because if you have all of the root mass on this side and you have less root mass on that side, you might have a situation where you can get lodging. But if it's possible, I would have drip on both sides. And I had one of my trials, we just have it on one side. Many of the cultivars doing pretty well, but from my experience, I'd want it to have both sides, maybe 1 or 2 emitters when you first start off on each side, having 4 of them so that you kind of get this equidistant root growth around it, if that makes sense. So does anybody see any cuts that they would make on this puppy? Oh yeah, see, it's crossing out in there. Yep, absolutely. See, some people have better intuition on these things.
Do something here, because this one is coming right over the
It is,
middle.
you're absolutely right.
That whole coming inside.
Yeah.
There's that one right there.
But you can see how it's kind of an art, right? And in nature's not perfect. I wish we'd have trees and they all grew exactly the same way, right? But there are a lot of times where no matter what, the cut you're going to make is going to reduce production or cause a temporal delay on getting fruit set. So sometimes it's like you know, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place with the cuts you're making, and you just have to wait until the next year, especially if it's been a while. Oh, look, some crisscrossing right here. Oh, see? So this is pretty good for I think this demonstration.